I guess I should start from the beginning. My name is Ethan Walker, and for most of my adult life, I've been the guy who does everything he's supposed to. I'm 38 years old, the proud owner of a small car repair shop, a husband, and a father of 2 incredible kids. That's how I always saw myself, a provider, a man who worked hard so his family could have a good life. Growing up, I didn't have much. My dad was a factory worker who spent his life clocking in and out while barely keeping food on the table. My mom did what she could, but I remember her crying at night more times than I care to admit. I swore that when I had a family of my own, I'd do better. I'd make sure my kids never knew what it felt like to go without, and I'd never let my wife worry about bills piling up. That's where my story begins, with good intentions. Claire and I met when we were 17, back in high school. She was everything I wasn't, beautiful, confident, and full of life. The kind of girl who could make you feel like the only person in the room just by looking at you. I'm not ashamed to admit I fell hard. I never believed someone like Claire would give me the time of day, but she did. We dated through senior year, and when I got my first full-time job as a mechanic, I asked her to marry me. We didn't have a big wedding, just a small ceremony in her parents' backyard, but it was perfect. Looking back now, maybe we were too young. Too naive. But when you're in love, you don't think about the hard parts. You just assume everything will work out because you've got each other. I thought Claire was happy with me, with the life we were building. For years, I believed that. We had 2 kids, Jake and Lily. Jake's 10 now, a ball of energy who lives and breathes baseball. Every time he pitches a ball in our backyard, he tells me he's going to be a pro one day. Lily is 7, and she's got this big imagination that keeps her busy for hours. She's always drawing, always creating something. I look at my kids, and I feel like I've done something right. No matter how hard the days are, seeing their faces reminds me what I'm working for. And then there's Buddy, our Labrador. He's been my shadow for years now, always following me around, curling up at my feet after a long day. Some nights, it felt like Buddy was the only one who really appreciated how hard I worked. Owning a car repair shop isn't glamorous. I spend my days covered in grease, crawling under engines, and listening to customers complain about the cost of fixing their cars. I've got calloused hands and a back that aches most nights, but I'm proud of what I've built. The shop's small, just me and a couple of guys I trust, but it keeps us going. Claire doesn't always see it that way, though. She likes nice things, new clothes, spa days, expensive shoes, and I've always done my best to give her what she wants. That's the thing about Claire. She's never had to worry. I've made sure of that. Even when money was tight, I found a way. I'd pick up extra work, stay late at the shop, or take on jobs no one else wanted. Claire used to tell me I worked too much. The kids miss you, Ethan. I miss you, she'd say, her voice tinged with frustration. I always promised to do better, but there was always another bill to pay, another reason to push through one more day. I thought I was doing the right thing. One night, I came home later than usual. The shop had been swamped all week, and I was exhausted. I opened the door and found the house dark and quiet. The kids were in bed, and Claire had left me a plate of cold lasagna on the counter. That was her way of letting me know she was mad without saying a word. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at that plate of food, and I felt something inside me twist. I'd missed dinner again. I'd missed Jake telling me about his baseball game and Lily showing me her latest drawing. The worst part was knowing that Claire had probably sighed and told the kids, "Your dad's working late again." I hated the thought of them going to bed disappointed in me. After I ate, I went upstairs and found Claire already in bed. She was lying on her side, her phone in hand, the screen casting a pale light over her face. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, trying to sound cheerful even though I was bone-tired. "Sorry, I missed dinner again. I'll take Sunday off, maybe we can do something as a family." "We'll see," she replied flatly, her eyes still glued to the phone. I stood there for a moment, waiting for her to say something else, but she didn't. I climbed into bed beside her and stared at the ceiling. Buddy curled up at my feet, letting out a sigh that mirrored my own. I didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of the end. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought my family was happy. But the truth was, I was blind to what was really happening. Claire, she had her own plans. And me? I had no idea I was about to lose everything. Looking back, the signs were there. You'd think someone like me, someone who pays attention to every rattle and knock in a car engine, would notice when something was wrong in his own home. But I didn't. It started with the little things. Claire's attitude, for one. She used to be the type who kissed me goodbye every morning and asked how my day went when I got home. That changed. Her good mornings were replaced with distracted nods, her questions became rarer, and when I tried to tell her about my day, she'd cut me off with a complaint about the kids, the house, or something I hadn't done. Then came the phone. Claire had always been on her phone a lot, Instagram, Facebook, chatting with her friends. But it was different now. She started guarding it like it was her most prized possession. If I walked into the room while she was scrolling, she'd quickly turn the screen off or tilt it away from me. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe I didn't want to. "What are you always looking at on there?" I asked her one night as I climbed into bed. "Just Pinterest," she said with a small smile. "Looking for ideas for the house." I smiled back. "As long as it doesn't cost me an arm and a leg." She laughed, and for a second, it felt normal. But then she turned off her phone and set it face down on the nightstand, just like she always did. Buddy, curled up at the foot of the bed, let out a soft growl. I remember chuckling and patting him. "Easy, boy. It's just us." Except it wasn't. I just didn't know it yet. The weeks that followed were more of the same. Claire was there, but not really. She'd spend more time on her phone or running errands that didn't seem to have an end. And when I tried to get close to her, it was like she had a wall up. I started coming home earlier, thinking it would help. But it didn't. If anything, it made things feel worse. Claire would give me a half-hearted smile when I walked in the door, but the spark that used to be there, it was gone. The kids didn't seem to notice, or maybe they were used to it. One evening, I tried to surprise her. I wrapped up work at the shop early and picked up dinner from her favorite Thai place. I even grabbed a small bouquet of flowers, nothing fancy, just daisies, the kind she used to say made her happy. I thought it would remind her of us, back when things were simpler. I walked into the house, proud of myself, feeling like maybe I'd finally done something right. The kids were in the living room, Jake playing a video game and Lily doodling quietly on the coffee table. "Where's your mom?" I asked. Jake shrugged, barely looking up from the screen. "She went out. Said she'd be back later." "Out?" I frowned. "Did she say where?" "Nope. Something about it hit me wrong. Claire wasn't the type to disappear without saying anything. I put the food on the counter and sat with the kids, trying not to let it bother me. But it did. For the first time, I felt a tiny seed of suspicion in the back of my mind, though I tried to push it away. She came home 2 hours later. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, the food long since gone cold. I heard the front door open and the sound of her heels clicking across the floor. "Hey," she said casually, walking into the kitchen. "You're home early." "Yeah, I thought I'd surprise you. I brought Thai." I gestured to the containers on the counter. "Oh," she said, glancing at the food like it was an afterthought. "I already ate." "Sorry. Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Jake said you went out." Claire shrugged and turned away to pour herself a glass of water. "Just running errands." For 2 hours. She paused for a split second, just long enough for me to notice, before she turned back to face me. Yeah. I stopped by the mall. You know, to look around. By yourself? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Why are you asking me so many questions, Ethan? I didn't realize I needed to give you a play-by-play of my day. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died on my tongue. She was deflecting, and I knew it. I'd seen customers do the same thing when they were trying to avoid admitting they'd screwed up their car. The only difference was, this wasn't a stranger, this was my wife. I'm not accusing you of anything, I said finally, my voice quiet. I wanted tonight to be nice, that's all. She sighed heavily, like I was exhausting her. It's fine, Ethan. I'm just tired. I'm going to bed. And that was that. She disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the cold food and the flowers that now felt ridiculous. I tossed them in the trash and went to sit on the couch with Buddy, who laid his head on my knee like he knew something was wrong. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head, trying to convince myself that Claire's behavior wasn't strange. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The problem was, I didn't know how to ask her about it without sounding paranoid. I mean, she was my wife. The mother of my kids. We'd been through so much together, it wasn't like her to do something like this. So I ignored it, told myself I was just overthinking things, and pushed the doubt aside. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had changed. And it wasn't going back to the way it was. I woke up the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Claire was already out of bed, which wasn't unusual. She'd taken to waking up earlier than me over the last few months, or at least that's what I told myself. I got dressed quietly and made my way downstairs, where I found Jake and Lily eating breakfast at the kitchen table. "Morning, kiddos," I said, forcing a smile. "Morning, Dad," Jake said through a mouthful of cereal. Lily just waved, too busy with the mountain of syrup on her pancakes. Claire wasn't anywhere to be seen. "Where's your mom?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jake shrugged. "She said she had to run some errands again." Errands. That word was starting to feel like a knife twisting in my gut. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat at the table with the kids, but my mind was miles away. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't trust Claire. I hated the way it felt, like some dark poison seeping into everything. I didn't want to be the guy who doubted his wife. I didn't want to be the kind of man who checked his wife's phone or questioned her every move. But that's exactly who I was starting to become. That afternoon at the shop, I couldn't focus. I found myself staring blankly at a half-disassembled engine for longer than I cared to admit. My mind kept drifting back to Claire's distant smiles, the guarded look in her eyes, the way she deflected my questions. Around noon, my buddy and coworker Greg noticed something was up. Greg's been with me at the shop for years, a good mechanic and an even better friend. He was the kind of guy who could read people like a book, and I wasn't doing a great job of hiding my feelings. "Ethan," he said, wiping grease off his hands as he walked over to me. "What's going on, man? You've been spacing out all morning." "Nothing," I muttered, trying to sound convincing. "Just tired." Greg raised an eyebrow. "Come on, I know you better than that. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I wanted to tell him, but the words wouldn't come out. What was I supposed to say? "I think my wife's lying to me." It sounded crazy, even in my own head. "It's just home stuff," I said finally. Greg gave me a long look but didn't push. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here. You've always been there for me, Ethan. Just returning the favor." I nodded, appreciating the offer more than I could say. When I got home that evening, Claire was already there. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like usual, but something about her posture seemed off. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, hanging my keys on the hook by the door. "How was your day?" "Fine," she replied, her voice flat. "Where'd you go today?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, like I was just making conversation. Claire glanced up at me, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Annoyance? Guilt? I couldn't tell. "Why are you always asking me that?" she said, a slight edge in her voice. "I ran errands, Ethan. That's all." "I'm just curious, that's all," I said, trying to diffuse the tension. "I feel like we don't talk much anymore." "Well, maybe that's because you're always at the shop," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "You come home late, and now you want to play detective when I do something with my day." Her words hit me like a slap. "That's not what I'm doing," I said quietly. I don't know, Claire. You've been acting different lately. I'm trying to figure out what's going on." For a moment, I thought she was going to say something. Her face softened just slightly, like she was about to let me in. But then she shook her head and stood up. "There's nothing going on, Ethan. You're imagining things. Maybe you need to stop working so much and actually get some rest." She walked past me without another word, disappearing into the bedroom and closing the door behind her. I stood there, frozen in place, the anger and confusion swirling inside me like a storm. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But deep down, I couldn't. I didn't know why, call it gut instinct, call it paranoia, but something about Claire's behavior didn't add up. That night, I stayed up late, sitting on the couch with Buddy at my feet. I stared at the darkened TV screen, my mind racing. For the first time in my life, I considered the unthinkable. What if Claire was lying to me? What if my wife, the woman I'd loved since high school, the mother of my children, was hiding something? And what if I was too afraid to find out the truth? A few days later, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My routine had become a cycle of work, questioning Claire's excuses, and wrestling with my own thoughts. It felt like there was a cloud hanging over me that I couldn't escape. I tried to keep busy at the shop, burying myself in the rhythm of repairs. But every time the tools fell silent, my mind went right back to Claire. Her clipped responses, her distant stares, and her seemingly endless errands, none of it added up. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the kids had gone to bed. Claire was upstairs, the glow of her phone lighting the bedroom like it had every night for months. I stared at my own phone, hesitating before opening the messaging app. I'd never been one to snoop, but Greg's words kept echoing in my head, "You've got to look out for yourself, Ethan. Don't let doubt eat you alive." I shook my head and set my phone down. This wasn't me. Claire deserved my trust. If she said there was nothing going on, I needed to believe her. But then, why couldn't I? The next morning, I had a rare late start at the shop. Jake and Lily were eating breakfast when Claire breezed through the kitchen, looking polished and purposeful. She kissed the kids on the tops of their heads and grabbed her purse. "I've got some errands to run," she said, glancing at me. I didn't say anything, just nodded. As the door closed behind her, Jake looked up from his cereal. "Mom's been running a lot of errands lately," he said. "Yeah," Lily chimed in, "she's always busy." I forced a smile. "She's just got a lot on her plate, guys. Don't worry about it." Inside, though, my heart sank. That afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. On my lunch break, I called Greg and asked him to meet me at the diner down the street. He showed up within minutes, his concern written all over his face. "What's going on, Ethan?" he asked as he slid into the booth across from me. I hesitated, fiddling with the edge of my coffee cup. "I think something's going on with Claire," I admitted finally. Greg leaned back, crossing his arms. What kind of something are we talking about? I took a deep breath and told him everything, the late-night phone scrolling, the endless errands, the way she'd been pulling away from me. When I was done, Greg nodded slowly, his expression grim. You need to find out the truth, man, he said. Because if you don't, it's going to eat you alive. I shook my head. How? What am I supposed to do? Follow her. Greg shrugged. If that's what it takes. You're not going to get any peace until you know what's really going on. His words stuck with me the rest of the day. As much as I hated the idea of snooping, I hated the not knowing even more. By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. That night, Claire said she had to work late. I'd heard that excuse enough times to know better. After she left, I waited about 15 minutes before grabbing my keys and heading to the garage. I told myself I just needed to ease my mind, to prove to myself that there was nothing to worry about. But deep down, I already knew I wouldn't like what I found. I kept my distance as I followed Claire's car through town, my palms slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel. She turned into a quiet residential neighborhood, pulling into the driveway of a house I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as I watched her get out of the car, walk up to the door, and knock. A man answered. He smiled when he saw her, stepping aside to let her in. The door closed behind them, leaving me sitting in the dark, my worst fears confirmed. I stayed there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to breathe. When I finally drove home, the reality of what I'd seen settled over me like a heavy weight. Claire was lying to me. And now, I had to decide what to do about it. The house haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes that night, I saw Claire walking through that door, the man's smile, and the way she disappeared without hesitation. I sat in the darkened living room long after the kids had gone to bed, Buddy resting his head on my knee as if sensing the weight I carried. By the time Claire came home, I'd made a decision. I couldn't let this go. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she walked in, her phone still in her hand. She didn't notice me at first, sitting there in the shadows. When she finally looked up, she startled, clutching her chest. Ethan. You scared me. What are you doing up? Waiting, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Her brow furrowed as she set her purse down on the counter. Waiting for what? For you, I said, standing. Buddy stirred and trotted off to the corner, sensing the tension in the air. Where were you tonight, Claire? Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, but long enough for me to catch it. I told you, I had to work late, she said, her tone carefully controlled. I stepped closer, crossing my arms. You expect me to believe that? Her jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? It means I followed you, I said, my voice rising slightly. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and accusing. I saw where you went. I saw who you were with. So don't stand there and lie to me, Claire. Her face paled, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she squared her shoulders, her expression hardening. You followed me, she said, her voice trembling with anger. What the hell, Ethan? That's crazy. What's crazy is watching my wife walk into another man's house and pretend everything is fine. I shot back. My hands were trembling, and I clenched them into fists to steady myself. I've been breaking my back to give you the life you wanted, Claire. And this is how you repay me? She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Oh, please. Don't act like some saint, Ethan. You're never here. You're always at that damn shop, working yourself to death. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have needed to. She stopped herself, but it was too late. The damage was done. Needed to what? I demanded, my voice cracking. Say it, Claire. Just say it. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing someone. Someone who actually makes me feel wanted. Someone who doesn't treat me like a goddamn afterthought. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back a step, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. You're unbelievable, I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. After everything we've been through. After everything I've done for this family. Don't you dare act like this is all my fault, she snapped, tears streaming down her face. You chose this life, Ethan. You chose the shop, the long hours, the stress. I've been telling you for years that I needed more from you, and you never listened. So don't stand there and act surprised. I stared at her, my mind racing. I wanted to yell, to scream, to throw something, anything to release the anger and heartbreak that was tearing me apart. But instead, I just stood there, silent and defeated. So what now? I said finally, my voice trembling. What happens next? Claire wiped her eyes, her expression softening slightly. I don't know, she said quietly. I don't know if we can fix this, Ethan. I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. Yeah. Me neither. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there. Buddy followed me upstairs, his tail wagging hesitantly as if trying to comfort me. I closed the bedroom door behind us and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. For the first time in my life, I felt completely lost. And for the first time, I didn't know if I could find my way back. The next morning, the house felt like a stranger's. Jake and Lily were eating breakfast, completely unaware of the storm that had erupted the night before. Claire's chair at the kitchen table was empty. She'd left early, or maybe she just couldn't bear to face me. I made myself a cup of coffee, sitting across from the kids, trying to act like everything was fine. Jake was rattling on about his baseball practice later, and Lily was showing me another of her elaborate drawings, this one of a princess standing on a castle made of clouds. I smiled and nodded, but my mind was miles away. Dad, are you okay? Jake asked, tilting his head. Yeah, Bud, I said quickly. Just tired. Late night at the shop. It was a lie, but it was easier than explaining the truth. How could I? They were just kids. They didn't deserve to have their world shattered because their parents couldn't hold it together. That afternoon, I called Greg. He didn't ask any questions when I asked him to meet me at the diner again. When he walked in, his face was full of concern. You look like hell, he said, sliding into the booth. Feel like it too, I muttered, staring into my coffee. What happened? I took a deep breath and told him everything. The confrontation, Claire's admission, the way she turned everything back on me. Greg listened quietly, his expression darkening as I spoke. Damn, he said when I finally finished. I'm sorry, man. I really am. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Do I try to fix this? Do I walk away? What about the kids? Greg rubbed his chin, thinking. Look, Ethan, I'm no expert, but if she's not willing to meet you halfway, you can't do it alone. You've got to think about what's best for you and the kids. Claire made her choices. Now it's time for you to make yours. His words stuck with me as I left the diner. Greg was right. Claire had made her choices. She'd chosen lies over honesty, distance over connection. But I couldn't make this decision in a rush. I owed it to my kids, and maybe even to myself, to take the time to figure out the right path forward. Over the next few days, Claire and I barely spoke. She came home late, left early, and when we were in the same room, the silence was suffocating. The kids seemed to notice the tension, though they didn't say anything. I caught Jake watching me with a worried expression more than once, and Lily had started drawing pictures of families holding hands, always with a sun in the sky, as if trying to will our lives back to normal. One night, after the kids were in bed, I finally broke the silence. Claire was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "We need to talk," I said, sitting down across from her. She sighed, setting her phone down but not looking at me. "About what?" "About us," I said. "About what happens next." She finally looked up, her eyes tired. "I don't know, Ethan. I've been thinking about it too, Anne. I just don't know. Do you even want to fix this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Because if you don't, tell me now. I can't keep living in limbo, Claire. It's not fair to me. It's not fair to the kids." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she was going to say something that would change everything. But instead, she just shook her head. "I don't know what I want," she whispered. The words cut deeper than I expected. I stood, unable to sit there any longer. "Well, let me know when you figure it out," I said, walking away before she could see the tears in my own eyes. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, Buddy curled up at my feet. I thought about the life Claire and I had built together, the years we'd shared, and how it had all come to this. I didn't have answers yet. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep living this way. Something had to change. And if Claire wasn't going to take the first step, maybe it was time for me to. The next morning, it started with Buddy refusing to eat. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe he was just being picky or had eaten something off the ground that upset his stomach. But by the second day, it was clear something was wrong. He was sluggish, barely moving from his spot in the corner of the living room, and his usual wagging tail was still. The kids noticed almost immediately. "Dad, what's wrong with Buddy?" Lily asked, kneeling beside him and stroking his fur. Her voice was thick with worry, and I could see her big blue eyes shimmering with tears. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, crouching down to join her. "We'll take him to the vet and find out, okay? He's going to be fine." Jake came over, his baseball glove still on his hand. "Buddy's never sick," he said quietly. What if it's something serious?" I put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out. Don't worry." Claire, as usual, was nowhere to be found. She'd left earlier in the day with the same vague excuse about errands. The kids didn't seem to notice her absence, but I did. At the vet, the news wasn't great. Buddy had developed an infection that required medication and close monitoring. The vet reassured me that with proper care, he'd recover, but it would take time. As we left the clinic, Lily clung to Buddy's leash as if letting go would make him worse. Jake walked silently beside me, his brow furrowed in worry. That evening, the kids and I worked together to make Buddy comfortable. We set up a soft bed for him in the living room and took turns giving him water and his first dose of antibiotics. Lily read him a bedtime story, her voice trembling with emotion, while Jake sat nearby, scratching behind his ears the way Buddy loved. Claire came home late, her expression irritated when she saw the makeshift setup in the living room. "What's all this?" she asked, dropping her purse on the counter. "Buddy's sick," I said, keeping my voice calm. "The kids and I took him to the vet. He needs some extra care for a while." She glanced at the kids, who were still doting on Buddy, and then back at me. "You're really making a big deal out of this, aren't you?" "It is a big deal," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Buddy's part of this family. He's sick, and we're taking care of him." Claire rolled her eyes. "Well, if you've got it covered, I'm going to bed. I've had a long day." She disappeared upstairs without another word, leaving me standing there, dumbfounded. The kids didn't seem to notice, they were too focused on Buddy, but her indifference hit me hard. This wasn't the Claire I'd married. Or maybe it was, and I'd just been too blind to see it. Over the next few days, Buddy slowly began to improve. The kids threw themselves into taking care of him, setting up a schedule to make sure he got his medicine and plenty of attention. Even I found myself spending more time at home, putting the shop in Greg's capable hands so I could be there for Buddy and the kids. It felt good to focus on something tangible, something I could fix. Claire, on the other hand, was a ghost. She came and went as she pleased, barely acknowledging Buddy's illness or the effort we were putting into his recovery. When she was home, she spent most of her time on her phone or locked away in the bedroom. One night, as I was sitting in the living room with Buddy's head resting on my lap, Jake sat down beside me. "Dad," he said hesitantly. "Yeah, Bud. Why doesn't Mom care about Buddy?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at him, unsure of what to say. Lily had wandered over, too, her face solemn as she waited for my answer. "It's not that she doesn't care," I said carefully. She has a lot on her mind right now." Jake frowned. "She's always gone. And when she's here, it's like she doesn't even want to be." Lily climbed onto the couch, curling up beside me. "Do you think she's mad at us?" she asked softly. "No, sweetheart," I said, wrapping an arm around her. "It's not about you. Sometimes grown-ups just forget what's important. But I promise, you and Jake and Buddy. You're the most important things in the world to me." They both nodded, though I could tell the answer didn't completely satisfy them. And honestly, it didn't satisfy me either. But it was the best I could do. As the kids drifted off to sleep that night, curled up on the couch beside Buddy, I realized something. No matter what happened with Claire, my kids and I still had each other. And for now, that had to be enough. The days blurred together after Buddy's illness. His recovery was steady, but the rest of the house felt like it was crumbling. Claire was more absent than ever, and the kids seemed to cling to me more each day, as if sensing that I was the only constant they could rely on. I tried to hold it all together, for their sake and for mine, but the weight of it all was starting to crush me. One evening, I came home early from the shop. Greg had practically shoved me out the door, telling me to go spend time with the kids. The house was unusually quiet when I walked in. Buddy's soft snores came from his bed in the corner, but there was no sign of Jake or Lily. "Guys?" I called, setting my keys on the counter. "We're upstairs, Dad." Jake's voice came from his room. I headed up, finding both kids sitting on Jake's bed. They were hunched over a tablet, their faces unusually serious. "What are you two up to?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Lily glanced at me, her wide eyes filled with worry. "Dad, do you think Mom's okay?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Jake turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was a photo, Claire, standing outside a coffee shop, laughing with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, and leaning a little too close for comfort. My stomach twisted into a knot. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice tight. "It popped up on Mom's Facebook," Jake said. "She didn't tag him or anything, but I saw it when I was looking for pictures of Buddy." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Claire had said she was working late that night. Seeing her smiling so easily with another man, it felt like a slap in the face. "Dad?" Jake's voice broke through my thoughts. "Do you think Mom's mad at you?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I don't know, Bud. Sometimes adults have things they need to figure out. But don't worry, okay? Everything's going to be fine." It was a lie, but what else could I say? They didn't need to know how badly I wanted to march into the bedroom and demand answers. They didn't need to see me unravel. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat alone in the living room with Buddy by my side. My phone sat on the coffee table, Claire's contact open on the screen. I'd typed out half a dozen messages, each one angrier than the last, but I couldn't bring myself to send any of them. Instead, I opened Facebook. I hadn't used it much in years, but now I found myself scrolling through Claire's profile. The photo was there, buried among updates about work and pictures of the kids. There was no caption, no explanation, just a snapshot of a moment I hadn't been part of. I clicked on the man's profile. His name was Ryan, and his profile was set to private. All I could see were his profile picture and a few public posts, none of which told me anything useful. Frustrated, I set the phone down and leaned back, running a hand through my hair. "What are you hiding, Claire?" I muttered. Buddy let out a soft whine, resting his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears, grateful for his quiet presence. The next day, I decided I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed answers. After dropping the kids off at school, I headed back home, determined to confront Claire. But when I walked through the door, I found the house empty. Her car was gone, and there was no note, no text explaining where she'd gone. I sat at the kitchen table, my frustration mounting. For months, I'd tried to make excuses for her behavior, to justify her absence, her distance. But now, as I sat there in the silence, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. Claire wasn't just pulling away, she was disappearing entirely. And if she wasn't willing to tell me why, I'd have to find out on my own. The tension in the house was becoming unbearable. Every interaction with Claire felt like walking a tightrope, and the kids seemed to pick up on it more and more. They were quieter, more cautious, as if they were afraid of setting something off. Even Buddy seemed subdued, though his health had steadily improved. His tail wagged a little more each day, and the spark was slowly returning to his eyes. One evening, the four of us were in the living room. Jake was showing me some baseball drills he'd learned at practice, and Lily was sprawled on the floor, sketching a picture of Buddy. Claire sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone as usual, her presence more like a shadow than a participant. "Look, Mom," Lily said, holding up her drawing. "I made Buddy a superhero. He's saving the day." Claire glanced up briefly, her expression unreadable. "That's nice, Lily," she said flatly before going back to her phone. Lily's face fell, and she set the drawing down quietly. Jake and I exchanged a glance, but I didn't say anything. What was there to say? Claire had been like this for weeks, distant, uninterested, as if she didn't belong in this family anymore. Later that night, as I was giving Buddy his medicine, the kids gathered around to help. Jake held the water bowl steady while Lily stroked Buddy's fur, whispering encouragements. "You're such a good boy, Buddy," she said softly. "You're going to get all better, I promise." I couldn't help but smile at their devotion. No matter how chaotic things were with Claire, the kids' love for Buddy was unwavering. It gave me a small sense of peace in an otherwise turbulent time. Claire chose that moment to come into the room. She took one look at the scene and let out an exasperated sigh. "Seriously," she said, crossing her arms. "You're all fussing over that dog like he's some kind of saint. It's ridiculous." The room fell silent. Jake and Lily stared at her, their expressions a mix of confusion and hurt. "What's ridiculous about taking care of Buddy?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Oh, come on, Ethan," she snapped. "You've been treating him like he's the most important thing in the world. Meanwhile, everything else is falling apart." "He's part of this family," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "The kids love him, and he's been through a lot. We're just trying to help him get better." "Well, maybe if you put half this effort into fixing what's wrong with us, we wouldn't be in this mess," she shot back, her voice rising. Jake flinched, his hands tightening around the water bowl. "Mom, why are you yelling?" he asked quietly. Claire's face softened for a moment, but then she turned away, shaking her head. "Forget it. Just keep playing house with your precious dog." She stormed out of the room, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she hugged Buddy tightly. "Why is Mom so mad at Buddy?" she whispered. I knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. It's not Buddy she's mad at, sweetheart, I said gently. Sometimes grown-ups get upset about things they don't know how to talk about. But it's not your fault, and it's not Buddy's either. Jake looked at me, his jaw tight. Then whose fault is it? I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. It's mine, I said, my voice steady. Because I've let this go on for too long. But I promise you, Jake, and you too, Lily. I'm going to fix this. For all of us. The kids didn't say anything, but I could see the hope flicker in their eyes. That was all I needed. As I sat with them and Buddy that night, I made a silent vow to myself, I'd find the strength to stand up to Claire, to fight for my family, and to make things right. Whatever it took, I wouldn't let this be the end. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in months. Claire was already gone, as usual, but instead of letting her absence eat away at me, I focused on what mattered, Jake, Lily, and Buddy. If I was going to fix this, I needed to start by giving them the stability they deserved. Over breakfast, I asked the kids what they'd like to do for the weekend. Can we go to the park? Lily asked, her face lighting up. Buddy's feeling better, and he loves playing there. That sounds great, I said, smiling at her enthusiasm. How about you, Jake? Jake shrugged, but I could see the hint of a smile on his face. Yeah, the park sounds cool. Maybe we can bring the baseball and play catch. Deal, I said, ruffling his hair. This weekend is all about us. As we planned our outing, I felt a flicker of hope. The weight of Claire's absence was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of our lives instead of just reacting to what was happening around me. That afternoon, I stopped by the shop to check in with Greg. He'd been running things smoothly, as always, but I could tell he was waiting for me to open up. When I finally told him about the latest blow-up with Claire, he shook his head, his expression grim. Man, I hate to say it, but it sounds like she's checked out, he said. You've got to figure out if she's even willing to try anymore. If she's not, you're just spinning your wheels. I nodded, his words hitting me hard but not surprising me. You're right. I've been putting off the hard conversations, hoping things would just go back to normal. But that's not going to happen, is it? Greg clapped me on the shoulder. It's not easy, Ethan. But you've got to do what's best for you and the kids. Don't let her string you along if she's not willing to meet you halfway. His advice stayed with me as I left the shop. Claire and I needed to talk, really talk, about where we were headed. And this time, I wasn't going to let her deflect or brush me off. If she was done, she needed to say it. And if there was still a chance to save our marriage, I needed to know that too. That evening, Claire came home just as I was putting dinner on the table. The kids were already seated, laughing as Buddy tried to sneak a piece of bread from Lily's hand. Claire paused in the doorway, her eyes taking in the scene. You're home early, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Yeah, she said, setting her purse down. I didn't have much going on. Why don't you join us? I suggested, gesturing to the empty chair at the table. For a moment, she hesitated, and I thought she might actually sit down. But then she shook her head. I'm not hungry. You guys enjoy. She disappeared upstairs, and the kids' laughter quieted. Jake glanced at me, his expression troubled, but I gave him a reassuring smile. It's okay, I said. Let's just focus on having a good night. After the kids were in bed, I went upstairs and found Claire in the bedroom, scrolling through her phone. I took a deep breath, my resolve solidifying. We need to talk, I said, closing the door behind me. She sighed, setting her phone down but not looking at me. What now, Ethan? I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice firm but calm. The silence, the distance, the way you've been pulling away from us, it's tearing this family apart. If you're done, Claire, just say it. But if you're not, then we need to figure out how to fix this. Because I'm not going to let our kids live in this limbo anymore." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might finally open up, but then she shook her head. "I don't know what you want me to say, Ethan." "I want you to tell me the truth," I said. "Do you still want this marriage? Do you still want this family? Or are you just waiting for me to make the decision for you?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away. "I need time to think." "You've had time," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Months of it. I deserve an answer, Claire. And so do Jake and Lily." She didn't respond, and the silence stretched between us. Finally, I turned and left the room, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. As I sat in the living room with Buddy at my feet, I realized something. No matter what Claire decided, I wasn't going to let her indecision hold me back anymore. My kids needed me, and I wasn't going to let them down. It was time to start moving forward, with or without her. The weekend arrived, and true to my promise, I made it all about Jake, Lily, and Buddy. We packed a picnic, grabbed Jake's baseball glove and Lily's drawing pad, and headed to the park. Buddy, feeling more like his old self, bounded around happily, his tail wagging furiously. The kids laughed as Buddy chased after Jake's throws, the sound filling the air like music. Lily spread out a blanket under a tree and started sketching the scene, her little face scrunched in concentration. Watching them, I felt a rare sense of peace. This was what I was fighting for, moments like these where everything felt simple and good. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat down with a notepad. I'd been avoiding this for weeks, but it was time to start thinking about the future. If Claire was going to keep pulling away, I needed to be prepared to stand on my own. I made a list of everything I needed to take care of: financials, legal advice, a plan for the kids. It felt overwhelming, but writing it down made it seem more manageable. For the first time, I felt like I had some control over the situation, even if it was just a small step. Claire came home late again that night. I was still at the kitchen table, my notepad in front of me, when she walked in. She glanced at me but didn't say anything, heading straight for the bedroom. I sighed, my frustration simmering just below the surface. The next morning, I decided to confront her again, but this time, I had a different approach in mind. As she was getting ready to leave, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, blocking her path. "We need to talk," I said firmly. "Ethan, I'm running late," she said, brushing past me. "No," I said, stepping in front of her again. "You've been running from this conversation for months. It ends today." She sighed, exasperated. "Fine. What do you want to talk about?" "I want to know where you stand," I said. "Because I'm done living in limbo. The kids deserve better, and so do I. If you want out, just say it. But if you want to fix this, then you need to start showing it. Right now, it feels like you're already gone." Her face softened slightly, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the Claire I used to know. But then she shook her head. "I don't have answers for you, Ethan. I'm still figuring things out." "That's not good enough," I said, my voice firm. "You've had time to figure things out, Claire. Months of it. I've been patient, but I'm not going to wait forever. If you can't commit to this family, then I need to know so I can start making decisions for me and the kids." She looked at me, her expression a mix of guilt and frustration. I just need more time," she said quietly. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over me. "Take your time," I said. "But don't expect me to keep waiting forever. And don't think I'm going to let this affect the kids any longer. They deserve stability, and I'm going to give it to them, with or without you." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't respond. She grabbed her bag and left without another word, leaving me standing in the doorway, my resolve stronger than ever. That day, I called an attorney. It wasn't an easy decision, but I needed to understand my options. The lawyer was straightforward, walking me through the steps I'd need to take if Claire and I couldn't work things out. It was sobering, but also empowering. For the first time, I felt like I had a roadmap for what came next. When the kids came home from school, I focused all my energy on them. We made dinner together, played a board game, and ended the night with a movie. As they fell asleep on the couch, Buddy curled up at their feet, I realized something: no matter what happened with Claire, I had everything I needed right here. The path ahead wasn't clear, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Claire's indecision define our lives anymore. It was time to take control and build a future for me and my kids, a future filled with love, laughter, and the stability they deserved. A few days later, I found myself at the park again with Jake, Lily, and Buddy. It was becoming our sanctuary, a place where we could escape the growing tension at home. Lily was sprawled on the grass, adding finishing touches to a drawing of Buddy chasing a ball, while Jake was teaching me how to throw a curveball. I wasn't great at it, but the way his face lit up every time I got it right made me feel like a hero. Claire's absence was noticeable, but the kids didn't bring it up. For them, this was normal now, our lives functioning around the hole she left behind. For me, it was a painful reminder of what we'd lost. That night, after the kids were in bed, Claire came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen cleaning up when she walked in. She paused in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You're up late," she said. "Just finishing up," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Did you have a good night?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It was fine." I set the dish towel down and turned to face her. "Claire, I meant what I said the other day. I need answers. The kids need answers." Her shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time in months, she looked tired. Really tired. "Ethan, I don't know what you want me to say. Things have been complicated." "What's complicated?" I asked, my voice steady. "Do you want this marriage, or don't you? Because if you're waiting for me to make the decision for you, that's not going to happen. This is your choice." She stared at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. "Then be honest with me," I said. "If you're done, say it. But don't keep stringing me and the kids along. We deserve better than that." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I need time to think." "Time's running out, Claire," I said softly. "The longer you wait, the harder this gets for everyone." The next morning, I woke up early and made pancakes for the kids. It was something we hadn't done in a while, and the look of delight on their faces made it worth the effort. Buddy sat at my feet, his tail wagging hopefully for scraps. "You're in a good mood, Dad," Jake said, pouring syrup onto his plate. "Yeah, I am," I replied, ruffling his hair. "Sometimes, you just have to focus on the good stuff, you know." Lily nodded seriously, her cheeks stuffed with pancake. "Like Buddy being better. And pancakes. And family time." I smiled, my chest tightening. They were right. No matter what happened with Claire, I still had my kids, and they were more than enough. That afternoon, I got a call from the lawyer. He had reviewed our situation and laid out the next steps if I decided to move forward with a separation. It was sobering, but hearing it laid out so clearly gave me a strange sense of peace. If it came to that, I'd be ready. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more I needed to do. Claire might be pulling away, but I needed to make one last effort, not just for the marriage, but for my own peace of mind. If I walked away, I needed to know I had done everything I could. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat down with Claire in the living room. She was scrolling through her phone, as usual, but this time, I reached out and gently took it from her hands. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She sighed but didn't argue. "Okay. What do you want to talk about?" I took a deep breath, meeting her eyes. "I want to know what's really going on with you. I want to understand. Because I can't keep living like this, Claire. The kids can't keep living like this. If there's something you're not telling me, now's the time." She looked away, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I feel like I've lost myself," she admitted. "I don't know who I am anymore. And every time I look at you and the kids, I feel like I'm failing all of you." Her words were raw, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was seeing the real Claire. "You're not failing us," I said gently. "But if you feel that way, let me help you. Let's figure this out together. But you have to let me in." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I'll try," she whispered. "I don't know if I can fix everything, but I'll try." It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The days that followed were tentative, filled with small steps and careful conversations. Claire and I were still far from where we needed to be, but there was an openness between us now that hadn't been there in months. She was trying, in her own way, and while I was still guarded, I allowed myself to hope. The kids noticed the difference almost immediately. One evening, Claire joined us at the dinner table for the first time in weeks. Jake's face lit up as he told her about his latest baseball practice, and Lily proudly showed her another drawing of Buddy, this time as a knight in shining armor. Claire smiled, a real smile, and for a moment, it felt like the family I remembered. Despite the progress, I knew I couldn't let my guard down completely. Claire's admission that she felt lost was honest, but it didn't erase the months of distance and deceit. I needed to know if she was truly committed to rebuilding our marriage or if this was just another moment of hesitation before she pulled away again. I called Greg one afternoon while the kids were at school and Claire was out. He'd been my sounding board through all of this, and I trusted his perspective. "She's trying," I told him. "But I'm scared, man. What if this is just a band-aid? What if she decides she's done in a month, or a week?" Greg was quiet for a moment before responding. "You can't control what she does, Ethan. All you can do is decide what's best for you and the kids. If she's really trying, give her the space to prove it. But don't lose sight of what you've already built. You're stronger than you think." His words stuck with me as I hung up the phone. I realized that while I couldn't predict the future, I could control how I approached it. And for now, I was choosing to focus on the small steps Claire and I were taking. One evening, after the kids were in bed, Claire and I found ourselves sitting together in the living room. She was flipping through an old photo album Lily had left out, smiling faintly at the pictures of birthdays and family trips. "We used to be happy," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. "We can be again," I replied, my voice steady. "But it's going to take work. From both of us." She looked at me, her eyes searching. "Do you really think we can fix this?" "I think we have to try," I said. "For the kids, for us. But only if you're all in, Claire. I can't do this alone." She nodded slowly, her expression serious. "I want to try. I do. But I don't know where to start." "We start here," I said, gesturing to the photo album. "We remember what we were fighting for. And then we figure it out, one step at a time." The next day, I suggested that we see a counselor. Claire hesitated at first, but after some discussion, she agreed. I made the appointment for the following week, feeling both nervous and relieved. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a step in the right direction. That weekend, we took the kids and Buddy to the park again. This time, Claire came with us. She sat on the blanket with Lily, helping her sketch the trees while Jake and I practiced throwing curveballs. Watching her laugh with Lily, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in so long. I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months: hope. Things were still fragile, and I knew there was a long road ahead. But for the first time, it felt like we were walking it together. The week leading up to the counseling appointment was filled with cautious optimism. Claire seemed more present, making an effort to be involved with the kids and even helping with dinner a few nights. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a glimmer of the partnership we used to have. But there were still moments that reminded me how fragile it all was. One evening, as Claire was tucking Lily into bed, I overheard Lily ask, "Mom, are you going to stay with us forever?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut, and I couldn't hear Claire's response over the roaring in my ears. The fact that Lily even felt the need to ask that question spoke volumes about how much our struggles had impacted her. Later that night, as Claire and I sat on the couch, I decided to bring it up. "Lily asked you something tonight," I began, keeping my voice calm. "About whether you're staying with us." Claire nodded, her expression heavy. "She did. I told her that I'm here and that I'm not going anywhere right now." "Right now?" I echoed, unable to hide the edge in my voice. "Claire, the kids need stability. They need to know that you're here for the long haul, not just until you decide otherwise." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm trying, Ethan. I really am. But I can't give them, or you, promises I'm not sure I can keep. I'm still figuring things out." Her words stung, but they didn't surprise me. This was the reality we were living in, and no amount of wishful thinking could change that. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I understand," I said finally. "But please, try to see it from their perspective. They need to feel like their mom is here for them, no matter what." Claire's eyes softened, and she reached out to take my hand. "I'll try," she said. "For them. And for us." The day of the counseling appointment arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. Claire and I drove to the office together, the silence between us charged but not hostile. When we sat down with the counselor, a kind-looking woman named Dr. Bennett, I felt both relieved and terrified. Dr. Bennett began by asking us to share why we were there. "I feel like we've lost each other," Claire said, her voice quiet but steady. "I've felt so disconnected from Ethan, from the kids, from myself. And I don't know how to get back to where we were." Her honesty surprised me, and I found myself nodding. "I've felt the same," I admitted. "It's like we've been living parallel lives instead of a shared one. And I don't want that anymore. I want us to be a team again." Dr. Bennett listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "It sounds like you both care deeply about your family and about each other," she said. "But you've been stuck in a cycle of disconnection and unmet needs. My goal is to help you break that cycle and rebuild a foundation of trust and understanding." For the next hour, we talked about our feelings, our fears, and the patterns that had brought us to this point. It was painful but cathartic, like lancing a wound so it could finally heal. By the end of the session, I felt like we'd made more progress in an hour than we had in the past 6 months. That night, as we sat in the living room after the kids had gone to bed, Claire turned to me. "Thank you for suggesting counseling," she said. It helped. More than I thought it would." "I'm glad," I said, smiling faintly. "I know we've got a long way to go, but today felt like a step in the right direction." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. "It did. And I want to keep taking those steps. For the kids, and for us." Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel, genuine hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for now, we were walking it together. And that was enough. Months later, I sat on the back porch, watching Jake practice his pitching in the yard while Lily sat cross-legged on the grass, sketching Buddy. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. Things hadn't been easy since that first counseling session. Claire and I had spent months working through years of unspoken resentment and miscommunication. There were moments when it felt impossible, when one or both of us wanted to walk away. But slowly, step by step, we found our way back to each other. Counseling became a regular part of our lives, a safe space where we could be honest without fear of judgment. Claire opened up about the guilt and pressure she'd been carrying, and I learned to listen without trying to fix everything. In turn, I shared my own fears and frustrations, the ways I'd felt invisible and unappreciated. We learned to see each other again, not as adversaries but as partners. One of the biggest breakthroughs came during a family session. Jake and Lily joined us, and hearing them talk about how they'd been affected by the tension in the house was a wake-up call for both of us. Jake admitted that he'd worried about having to choose between his parents, while Lily tearfully confessed that she'd drawn pictures of our family every night, hoping it would bring us closer. Their honesty broke my heart, but it also reminded me why we were fighting so hard to make this work. Claire and I made a pact that day: no matter what happened between us, we'd always put the kids first. That promise became our guiding star, pulling us through the darkest moments. Now, as I watched my family laugh and play in the yard, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the hard conversations, the painful honesty, and the stubborn determination that had brought us to this point. Claire came out onto the porch, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, and sat down beside me. "They're growing up so fast," she said, nodding toward Jake and Lily. "They are," I agreed, taking a sip of coffee. "But they're happy. And that's what matters." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "We did good, didn't we?" I reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Yeah, we did." The road ahead was still uncertain, as life always is. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. Because no matter what, we'd face it together. Subscribe to our channel so your significant other never dares to cheat on you. And don't miss the next story, it's even more shocking than this one. If you're under 18, you might want to think twice before listening to what's coming next.